Welcome to Pull to Open.
Welcome indeed to the show. It's Pull to Open. It's a quest to watch all of Doctor Who in random order. I'm Pete Paschal.
And I'm Chris Taylor.
We're a couple of guys who really love the show, even if it's sometimes hard to tell. And yeah, we jump around the whole of Doctor Who in every episode, or rather, from episode to episode of this fine podcast. And,
yes, we have a randomizer. We have a randomizer installed in the central console of the podcast. And
yeah, when I say episode, I mean story. Because, the old era, they'd have different episodes that, they were serials, right? Everyone knows. Why am I telling people, bringing them up to speed? You're listening to a Doctor Who podcast, you know how it goes. But you know what I mean. We jump from story to story, and we really like to chat about it. We pull it apart, you might say.
Yeah, and I'm really enjoying the randomizer's choices so far, to the point where we've done the randomizer now twice, and It has given me chills down the spine.
It has almost been decidedly not random, it seems. I feel like we're almost being manipulated.
Yes. So previously on Pull to Open, we should definitely have that bit at the start of the show.
Yeah.
We watched Planet of Fire.
That's right.
It was the first place the randomizer took us to. Late in the Davidson era, the episode before Caves of Androzani, the last episode for Turlo, and the last episode for Kamelion, the robot. And we spent so much of last week talking about, or I guess 2 weeks ago, talking about the first appearance of Kamelion in King's Demons. Like, that was a common topic of discussion, you'd say.
Well,
during
it's because
that podcast.
he was only on screen twice.
Yes,
and
so it's
actually, it's bizarre that the randomizer just took us to both of those adventures right out of the gate.
So that was what we discovered at the end of the show. That our next destination was the King's Demons.
Yes.
This episode we've been talking about all along, and it was so chilling, and it's continued to be chilling when I think about it. Especially as I've been reading an excellent time travel novel this week called Una Out of Order.
Oh, interesting. Tell me.
I don't know if you've heard of it. Highly recommend it. It's one of many millions of tangents we'll go on. Una Out of Order is about a woman who experiences her life from every year on her birthday. She goes to a different year in her life. So she's mentally the same age, physically a different age. She cannot control which year it is. And there's a wonderful chapter that I've just got to in the middle of the book where she goes to the year 2004, spoilers, which is a word used in the book. She goes to the year 2004 and sort of finds herself in the middle of this marriage to this guy that she doesn't know, and she tries to make it work, ends up getting divorced, but she's like, what on earth did I see in this man? And, and then basically hits the randomizer at New Year's Eve, right? I'm going to go travel to a new year. And to the complete surprise of the reader, she ends up in 2003. Okay. So she experiences the first episode of their marriage second. And that is exactly what we've done here. We've watched. I
was wondering where you were going with that. Although I do love those. Yeah, those personal time travel stories I do like, and we're rewinding a bit to Chameleon 1, the introduction.
Yeah, so it was really weird that it took us there, and it's become even weirder after watching the King's Demons, because I see all sorts of connections in the world at large, all sorts of reasons why this was the best episode for the randomizer to take us to, which we'll get to.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we will get to that. I'm not sure if I have quite as much in-depth insights, but I'm sure they'll come out during the...
Well, I'll give you a hint.
Yeah.
TikTok sea shanties.
Oh, okay. Yes. That is a new thing. That is a January 2021 thing, which is suddenly relevant. And
we have an equivalent
in this episode.
Yeah. The best, may I say, I think the best shanty-like song ever to appear in Doctor Who.
Honestly, it might be the best thing about the episode, and we'll get to it. But I mean, it works. A lot doesn't. And maybe that's where to start. So my BritBox was doing great, by the way, this time, and I figured out a new way to sort of get around my sync issue. which is to say that instead of playing BritBox through my Fire TV, I just cast it from my phone to my Chromecast.
Well done.
There it is.
You fixed your TARDIS.
Yep, I got my little workaround.
I think I did. I had the same issue as last time, which is that I had to drop into the end of the previous episode to be able to watch this one.
That is weird. So, what are you watching on again?
I'm watching on Apple TV.
Okay.
And the interface is kind of janky.
Yeah, that could be. I'm not. Yeah, I have nothing to say.
And here
we're
we are.
Small
we're
podcast, and we like Apple to be on that platform, so we're just gonna. Yeah, I'm sure it's just a random.
We're exploring in the show also the frontiers of Doctor Who streaming. Because it does change every so often.
Well, and it's also such a different way to consume the show. I mean, I said this last time, and on Planet of Fire, I sort of stretched it out. Like I did it over 4 nights.
Yeah. Very impressed. You were recreating the old school feeling of having to wait a week. And our modern day is the equivalent of a 1983 week. So
I was just thinking that with inflation and everything getting faster, that's about right. And this time I did not do that. I was actually just had a few full nights, and I figured, well, I might not have another night. I think I watched it Thursday, and so I just blasted through both. So that's
it is basically it's a 50-minute Doctor Who movie.
Exactly.
It's 2 episodes
of getting it over with. This time around, this that's a very episode specific feeling. So we'll get into it. Obviously, nothing. Got to say, nothing pleases me more than starting episodes with the Davison title sequence. It's so, of that era. It's looking back, it's kind of kitschy now, and it's very like you got the neon logo. But it's just so bold in its 80s-ness. I mean, like the sort of lights that come out, they're all...
It's good 80s.
It's good 80s.
The later one, the Sylvester McCoy one, was the epitome of bad 80s, and I think this is the epitome of good 80s.
Yeah, it's and even the Colin Baker version of this one, which kind of like changes the lights a little bit and adds some rainbow effects, is not... I mean, it's just not... doesn't work. Even because one of the cool things about the tune and the synth tune they have is that for the synth theme is that the stars that fly out are kind of in sync with the music. And I, not to get too far into other things, but when the Colin Baker one comes out, was really only used for Trial of a Time Lord. It's the lights are different and they're not really in sync with the music. It doesn't really make any sense. So anyway,
I'm going to have to watch the Colin Baker intro now just to see about their music syncing issues.
Yeah, it's all over YouTube somewhere. So anyway, comes out. It's the King's Demons, episode 1. I kind of wonder, what was the last? This is a short episode, so it's 2 episodes, two 25-minute episodes. And the last time they did a 2-episoder was, I believe, Black Orchid.
Black Orchid, yes. In season 19, which is generally better received. Than this set of
it's also like, and we're not here to talk about Black Orchid, but like Black Orchid notably was like the last true historical, I think, the series ever did, where there was no like pseudo historical where there's like aliens in Pompeii or whatever. That was the Black Orchid. There was like really no bad guy who was like shouldn't be there. It was like a sci-fi thing. But
I will say one of the best things I can say about the King's Demons is that it made me want to rewatch Black Orchid, because of the similarities. Like that might be the flip side of this. It might be a little bit better as a historical serial, and it was better received. And I got that feeling. So it's an appropriate comparison. If we could set the controls of our TARDIS to the next episode. Or the next serial. Instead of being randomized, I think that would be in my top 10 of destinations to go, maybe top 3.
These 2-episode, either historical or pseudo-historical. This one's more of a pseudo-historical, obviously. And there's one more of the era, and it's I think in the next season it's called The Awakening, which sort of mixes some time periods. But Davison era was notable for these sort of shorter, almost bottle episodes. And I think if you take this in that vein, I think it's a little more bearable, and it's not something they kept on doing though. There's really bite-sized. I don't know what the deal was there, but there wasn't really. They stopped sort of doing the bite-sized stuff after that, unless you count like the last little bit of Robin time work.
It's a foreshadowing, really. These little Davison 2 episode things, because you're basically looking at exactly the same runtime as a modern Who episode.
Yeah, that's true.
It sort of feels like one. Like this has a bit of sort of a dour version of the Robin Hood episode in the Cavaldi era. Very much the same timeline, of course, which is one of the reasons why. We'll get to this shortly, but this episode features King John, and King John of England in the 13th century. And what is he well known for, other than the Magna Carta? He's well known for being in the Robin Hood stories. And here we are at the end of a week where Robin Hood has been a big part of the narrative.
Robin Hood of
in terms of the Reddit Wall Street pirates boosting GameStop stock, and Robin Hood, untrue to his name, shutting them down, being a bit more King John-like.
Yeah, or Sheriff of Nottingham-like. I'm always a little like, was King John the good guy or the bad guy? I know like there's been a lot of versions of Robin Hood, and I think even like the popular-ish, popular to some people, Kevin Costner version has King John come in at the end and be nice.
So as the
help everybody, but
as the podcast's Oxford trained historian, I should tell you that I've done a little digging into King John's history because of this episode, and I can tell you the current historical opinion. I can also tell you what an Oxford historian would say about this, which is 99% of them would say it's not my period. That's what you say about everything. When you study history, you get really deep into one tiny period. Closest I ever came to King John was an essay on Henry II, his dad. And the whole Becket crisis. But yeah, I've looked into King John, and yeah, he's renowned as a bad dude. Right. He's a bad dude in the Robin Hood stories. He's a bad dude in just about everything. He's kind of a weak guy in The Lion in Winter. Have you ever seen that?
I have not seen The Lion in Winter.
Oh, everyone should watch The Lion in Winter.
The Disney Robin Hood one with the animals. So that one,
Lion in
he's
Winter
kind of a bad
is
dude. Weak dude.
Peter O'Toole is Henry II and his three sons, and one is Richard Lionheart, played by Anthony Hopkins, and then John is the smallest son, and he's kind of a weakling who gets threatened by knives a lot. Anyway, so yeah, King John he got a bad rap. He is today known as a good administrator who was kind of just an asshole to everyone needlessly.
Gotcha.
So again, I'm seeing a historical comparison. But he was kind of an asshole. He was kind of corrupt, and disliked his leader. But yes, he was more of a competent administrator than our most recent ex-president.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just thinking that. Where's the competent administrator part come in? There's probably some better.
He had one or two around him, I guess. But yes,
yeah, probably some historical analogies that work better that I'm not that don't come to mind. But yes, history is certainly replete with jerks who are good at running things.
There is another more Trumpian character in this episode that we'll get to.
Yes, absolutely. So we open up. We might as well let's get to the action. So, zing, we're there.
There's only 2 episodes we've got to cover. We've got a lot of filler here.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's only 2. Well, and the last thing I'll say about that is, like, I think you're dead on in that this is some of these 2 episoders are good and bad, but at least if they're not so good, you get them over with, and they force you to write quicker and maybe simplify some things, which certainly there was a lot of complexity, or if not complexity, a lot of corridor running in classic Doctor Who that could be cut out, and a lot of those 4-episoders could have been 2-episoders. But this is a true 2-episoder, and it opens up in we're in 1215, sometime in March, early March, and it comes right to it. It comes right to this castle and the court, and it is this. It's very clear. This is this old medieval setting, and it's one of the few shots. You have this sort of court, right? It's like everyone's drinking and sort of celebrating, and there's a feast, and there's one of the very few shots I've ever seen in Doctor Who of actual dogs. That was the thing that struck me the most.
2 Irish wolfhounds, giant dogs.
They were big,
sitting on the floor. And that to me was the most compelling thing about the scene, because I'll just say this: it's a beautiful setup, but it is very much BBC 1983.
Agreed.
Just all over it. And in fact, there was a rumor for many years that this set was later reused for the Blackadder, the first episode, the first season of Blackadder, which is set in, a little bit later on, but used a lot of the same sort of costumes. That is not true. I'll just dispel that myth right at the start. But there is an Iron Maiden featured in this. There is in these episodes.
And there's
actually
this
story.
I think there's two. There's one that's sort of in the background.
Yes.
There might be. They're very similar though. But yes, there's an Iron Maiden, and there's a lot that happens with that.
And one of those Iron Maidens later shows up in the Blackadder.
Oh wow! Spoiler alert.
Yep.
but
that's one of the few connections. A lot of the props were reused from this.
Interesting, but hopefully the dogs got another gig out of it too. Because honestly, this gig they didn't serve them that well. They were in the first scene, and you never see those dogs again. As far as I could tell, I was watching for them.
Bring the dogs back. They were so good. They were so compelling.
And they were very.
I couldn't keep my eyes on anything else.
They weren't barking. They were hanging out. There was a lot of food around, and they weren't jumping on tables. So those are very well behaved dogs.
Seriously.
And we get a lot of people talking all of a sudden. You realize quickly the person at the center of the big table is the king. I don't think it's necessarily revealed right away which king, but as we've been talking about, it's revealed that it's King John. And there's a guy who is clearly like the owner of the castle. We learn his name is, I think, Ranulph Fitzwilliam.
Mm-hmm.
And the king is kind of a jerk to him. Even though he's like giving him like food and all the honors that a king should have, I guess, at this period, the king's kind of a jerk.
Which is kind of the most historically accurate point in the episode. King John was renowned for being an asshole to his parents, to the point of taking their wives as his mistresses.
Whoa, that's like Caligula level stuff.
Yes, and it sort of broke an unspoken rule, which was the king was allowed to have mistresses, all kings did, but to take your noblemen's wives as your mistresses was just not done, and it's one of the reasons why they revolted against him.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I think we're sort of meant to read the scene as if he, it's obvious that something's a bit not right with King John.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, it's like, this is King John functioning A-OK as expected historically.
Huh. Interesting. Well, there's a back and forth between Fitzwilliam and the king, and then there's a person
over taxes.
Who we find out over all the stuff. And there's a person who we quickly learn is on the king's side. He's the king's champion. His name is Sir Gilles Estram, which I believe is also French. But also, yes. I'm not up to you. Again, you are the chief historian here at Pull to Open. But I understand there was like a lot of French being spoken and French influence at the time. So that this is actually pretty
yes.
accurate, right?
So the kings of England were basically French at this point. And John is significant because he's the first king since the Norman conquest of England, since England was conquered by Norman kings, to lose Normandy. Yeah, he was famously called... No, it's imagine you were Prime Minister and you lost Scotland, which is kind of probably about to happen. Spoiler alert for immediate future British history. But yeah, very, very similar to that. He lost a lot of land in France. His mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, another famous historical figure who looms large in The Lion in Winter, played by Katharine Hepburn. And she was Eleanor of Aquitaine. She had massive lands in France. She lost them, and then by dint of inheritance, he lost them very early in his reign. So yeah, he was all about France and doing war in France, and it's appropriate that he has a sort of evil-looking French assistant.
Well,
here.
evil-looking in many ways, and I don't want to, I think it's okay to throw some spoilers in at this point because I think it's important. Like it's the Sir Gilles Estram is played by Tony Ainley, And he's got kind of a goatee, and you can sort of tell. I think you can tell all this. I guess I would ask you, and maybe you knew this going in, so it's hard to know. Like, could you tell immediately this is like, oh, that's Tony Ainley?
Yes. I was primed for this because master reveals were just sort of such a staple of Davison episodes. And you'd always have that thing in the Radio Times where they give him the name of a fake actor.
Right. Yeah.
In this case, it was... Yes. So Gilles Estram, Estram being an anagram of master, was played by James Stoker, which is an anagram of master's joke. Which is such a John Nathan Turner thing to do.
It's a 2-episoder, so, again, spoiler alert, the reveal happens at the end of the episode, so it's kind of funny that they had to even do that, right? Because in the credits of the episode, it's just him. But I think, because the Radio Times listing, they needed to do it. But I found it like there has been, I don't want to say good makeup and bad makeup, because that's inaccurate, but like makeup that essentially like hides it versus doesn't. And I felt, they did this numerous times, of course. And the reveal in Castrovalva, I distinctly remember not knowing that the portrait was, that was a reveal to me. I was like, whoa, oh, and then you kind of go, of course.
Agreed.
This one, and it's really hard to remember. You're talking 30-some years ago. But I do vaguely remember not knowing, going in, certainly. But I also thought there were a couple of close-ups in the episode that were probably ill-advised if you were actually trying to keep it a secret. Because there is a close-up later where he's I think he's in the dungeon, and he's holding his sword up, and there's sort of a slight shadow over his head, and, it's, I guess, some kind of cool effect they're trying to do. But it was a very big close-up, and even with, like, at 480i or whatever the resolution was, I was like, hold on a second, wait a minute. And I don't know if that was intended, because maybe it's like, did they want people to sort of suspect at that point? I don't know. I don't know if they were thinking that hard about it, but it's like I remember even as a kid thinking like, oh wow, I bet that guy's the master.
You don't really see his face in the early scenes when he's introduced as the champion, which he's shot from behind a lot, which I think is sort of an admission that the makeup job is not great. Is not very well hidden. I thought it was okay rewatching it. I didn't actually identify him in those early scenes because so much of him was shot from behind. I didn't remember that was the specific role he was in. So
yeah, it's not until later. I guess
you could say I was moderately fooled.
Yeah, when he's in the dungeon. So, like, what happens is, the guy's insulted, or says he's insulted. So Sir Gilles, we'll call him, says that you've insulted the king. Throws down the gauntlet in front of the table, and it's like they need to do a way to they need to do a jousting match essentially to recover the honor
to sort out exactly.
Yeah, it's Ranald.
The joust takes place.
Yes.
In the, I'll just say one of the coldest Januaries that Doctor Who has ever filmed on, and the entire cast seems to be freezing.
Yeah, it definitely looks that way, and you're almost like jealous of those the folks on the horses because they at least get to like suit up in all this armor. I'm sure, but it looks the joust. It's like a jousting match, I guess. The big helmets, the joust, the javelin, or no, what do you call it?
The lance.
Lances. Thank you.
Yes.
My goodness, it's been a while since I played D&D. Clearly.
Yeah.
So they do this in the next morning, and you're kind of getting like I think about 5 to 7 minutes in, and you're like, "Where's the Doctor? Is this Doctor Who?" Which is kind of a bold choice, and I kind of like it for that. I like that they did that. This kind of like we're going to do some other stuff. Follow along.
This was sort of a thing in Classic Who, though, wasn't it? That they do real historical cold opens quite a lot.
Yeah.
Or cold opens on, the planet that they're about to arrive on that kind of drag on. And I remember that impatience as a kid watching this stuff. And you'd be like, where's that Doctor? And you sort of, the delicious anticipation of it. I kind of enjoyed that.
Yeah. No, it's all right. And they, the jousting happens, there's like 2 or 3, I think there's one or two before the big entrance, which is like there's two smashes of the horses going at each other. What do you call those? one round? I mean, what's that? Is that a period? A quarter?
I'm not familiar with jousting terminology, but something like that.
Yeah, route?
One round. You just kept going. You kept going until Honor was satisfied.
Right. And so in the midst of one of these things where the horses are coming at each other, the TARDIS materializes right on the field. And so the horses get scared, they stop, and there's an interesting exchange within the TARDIS. So it's Tegan and Turlough and Davison. And Turlough expresses frustration that they are on Earth again. And he talks about how they were supposed to be, and I believe it's in this episode or right at the end of the next, that they were supposed to be going back to his planet, which is a very interesting thing to note after we just watched Planet of Fire.
Yeah, what was that about? Because he didn't know that he could go back to his planet at this point.
So this is,
and we later discover that he was a political prisoner from his planet who, he didn't know the laws had changed, so it would be the last place he'd want to go.
Exactly. So you kind of have this weird thing where clearly a good chunk of that backstory had not been written at this point. So this is the season before Planet of Fire. And you kind of there's an interesting, it's one of these weird sort of Doctor Who discontinuities that you need to fill in and throw some headcanon, which can be kind of fun. So did he tell the Doctor that he was from some other planet, and then to kind of for whatever reason throw him off, not to be so mysterious, but not to reveal that he was actually a political prisoner? It sort of brings forward a bunch of possibilities there.
Yeah, this is really one of the biggest ways in which the Turlough character doesn't work, doesn't cohere over the course of his run. Partly because he's still wearing a schoolboy uniform the whole time, but also partly because the backstory is meant to be mysterious, but we never quite get what the mystery is.
Right.
We should go to my planet. Meaningful pause.
And there's no name given. There's no, hey guys, you want to put on these hats that are everyone on my planet wears? There's nothing like that. Because of course, that would require some actual content. Which they didn't really want to give. So, again, it's one of those weird discontinuities. It's a little annoying, but I'm actually not sure if that was ever addressed in an off-camera adventure, whether it was like a Big Finish or a novel of some kind. I know there was like a Turlough novel from long ago that I never really got through. But interesting stuff. So they come out on the field of the
we should also say, first of all, Celery Watch.
Oh, Celery Watch, yep.
So a regular segment, because the Doctor does actually wear a pretty non-wilting celery in this. It's not as bad as it would later become in Planet of Fire.
No, it's
but
all
it's
right.
very prominent.
He clearly, they'd stopped at Whole Foods before the filming, and they got a good bunch. So we're at Celery 1 here. How are we counting this, by the way? Are we doing scene by scene or celery by celery?
I think we're giving the celery grades. I think I'm going to give this a solid B+.
Yeah, and I think
as jacket celery.
It's either stays there or sort of drifts to a B in the second episode, because Davison has a costume change at some point and loses the celery for a minute and then puts it back on, and the celery like a obedient pet did not fall off his frock coat when he puts it back on at the end.
Very true.
Anyway, they're back out.
So they've got the TARDIS set to random. I should say we should note whenever the Doctor is doing the same thing that we're doing, which is randomizing his way through the universe.
True.
He did not set the coordinates, he says meaningfully, and here they are on a very specific date, March the 4th, 1215. One of the few times that Doctor Who has gotten that specific.
And I guess they got it right. I mean, they must have picked up a book or something. Probably didn't pick up enough books, given what transpires later. But yeah, it's March the 4th, 1215, and there's a nice little exchange, which is very indicative of how Davison and Janet Fielding were playing the Doctor and Tegan, where Tegan's like, "Who's king?" And I love Davison is like the master at being exasperated by his companions, particularly Tegan. He goes, "Oh, Tegan, King John, of course." Like, kind of rolls his eyes at her.
How could you not know, you Australian? Remember your colonial history. Come on, everyone was supposed to. This is definitely very much an era of that's the way you taught history. Everyone learned the names of all the kings and when they were and which order. And I will still have it, cinched on my memory, even if I hadn't taken history later on, that Henry II, King Richard, King John of England. And then who comes next? Henry III. Anyway, I used to know it a lot better than I do. I've been in the US for 20 years, but it's so intimate with the British character, and evidently with the Doctor's character, he has the kings memorized.
The Doctor is always there to wag his finger at you British school children who are hiding behind the sofa. Don't forget your studies; it's very important.
It's like the ghost of Reith. Sir something Ruth, who was like the BBC was always supposed to educate with as much as it entertained, and that was sort of the purpose of Doctor Who. It's why we have historical serials in Doctor Who.
Absolutely.
That sort of Reith mandate.
Though this one would be, I'm not sure if, again, there's stuff we can get into later about the Magna Carta. But there's one interesting note here. To jump ahead a couple of scenes, they get to the castle, and there's almost like a reversal for a second of the historical attitude between the Tegan and the Doctor, because they start talking about this is right when the Magna Carta was signed, and Tegan's like, well, it makes some crack about how cold it is, and like, I'll bet that's why they forced him to sign it. And the Doctor sort of corrects her, at least in his mind, like he was as much for it as anyone else. He wasn't forced to. And she's like, I know my history, Doctor. And he kind of sort of raises his eyebrow. Do you? So we're kind of meant to sort of think this is, it actually is kind of effective in a certain sense, even though it sort of contradicts what was, or at least slightly contradicts sort of the Tegan's knowledge of history a couple scenes earlier. And that you're starting to think, oh wow, like something's up with the king, something's up with history, and even the Doctor knows what's really at with this historical event, and this has a good chance at this point at being interesting.
He's engaging in historiography, which is right. I love it when the Doctor does that. He's sort of talking about the historical interpretations of King John being a bit out of sync, which they were. There was a process of rehabilitation of King John in the 20th century as we discovered more documents, because he had bad press at the time from a couple of monks who just wrote some really bad shit about him because he had a massive conflict with the Pope, massive falling out with the Pope, and was excommunicated at one point. So the Pope shut down the churches for 6 years or something like that. I mean, it was a big deal, almost a civil war in England against the Pope because the king wanted a different Archbishop of Canterbury.
Right.
So anyway, it's by the by. Magna Carta, let's just get into it now, and also point out this is another reason why the randomizer took us here. Magna Carta has been much on the British mind during the pandemic because there's been a sort of laughable fake news thing, the idea that you if you stick something about Magna Carta article, whatever, some particular article in it that doesn't exist, if you stick that in the window of your shop, then you're allowed to open no matter what the lockdown rules say.
Odd.
And it's utter stuff and nonsense.
Yes.
And one of the reasons it's utter stuff and nonsense is that Magna Carta is not actually in force in British law. Like, we talk about it a lot as an ideal, but it's not. It wasn't accepted at the time. It was a compromise brokered by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Pope's choice. Who just put this before both sides, and both sides said, both the king and the barons who were rebelling against him, they both said, yeah, sure, we'll sign it. Neither of them meant it. It was never enforced. And it's just sort of, became a totem in later British history.
So obviously this sort of throws a wrench in the whole works of the Master even caring.
Sorry to throw a wrench into the Master's plan before we've even talked about what the Master's plan is.
there's a lot to analyze, both within Doctor Who and sort of what they're doing here. But putting aside the whole idea that the Master would even care about this, even if the Magna Carta did have the significance that it has, there is that whole sort of reinterpretation. Like if it didn't even really matter much at the time anyway, how is this going to even affect Earth history in a way that would be to his advantage? And I got to say, the Master is really like it's really vague how this even works, other than like he's a chaos agent and he loves just stirring stuff up, and he just sort of picks the stakes. History.
The stakes could not be lower,
right?
I think in this serial. I'm going to replace King John. With a king who looks exactly and acts exactly like King John. Anyway.
Yeah, which kind of like speaks to like why was this episode written this way in the first place? And clearly there was, I think, and I don't know if this checks out through. You've probably done more research than I have, but it seems like they wrote a story to give Doctor a robot. A shape-changing robot, and they kind of wrote around it. They were like, all right, let's pick someone in history that he could be impersonating. King John. All right, they'll do the Magna Carta. Oh yeah, I heard the Magna Carta is really important. Great. Yeah, let's throw that in there, and maybe the Master's behind it. Okay, cool. Done. We have a couple episodes at the end.
That's a great working theory of how this is written. I totally agree with it.
Yeah. So anyway, back to the story. So the king, what's surprising to the Doctor and to supposedly the audience watching is that the king doesn't really react in the same way all the people react to the arrival of the TARDIS and its crew. Everyone's like, what is this? The same old. Oh, medieval people. We're scared. We don't understand. But the king is very like taking it in stride. He's like, oh, cool. These guys are demons. That's cool. And he kind of reacts in a like. Even though I'm not scared and I'm sort of declaring you demons, come and hang out with me, demons. Which is all very weird.
Very bizarre. What is the thing that TARDIS is supposed to have that people don't notice it?
Perception filter.
Not
established until the new series, but yes, it sort of lets everyone in every episode in the previous series where someone should have noticed a police box, or it sort of explains away why he can sort of leave it wherever, and most of the time no one really cares. It's a thing that works when it needs to. This is definitely a time when they care.
Yeah, they definitely care about the TARDIS, and are kind of freaked out by it, but not too freaked out that they don't just invite its inhabitants to sit with them and watch a bit of jousting in the freezing cold.
Exactly. So the jousting goes
the Doctor's celery in this scene, by the way, is looking a lot less wilted, a lot greener than the yellow celery of the TARDIS.
Oh, wow. Clearly the location celery, much fresher. There must have been like a celery garden nearby or something. Where was this shot? It must have been shot near a supermarket or something.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know if we have the location data
this time.
It's not a quarry. I wonder if it's anywhere close to Windsor Castle, which is where, near where Magna Carta was actually signed at Runnymede.
Oh.
Anyway,
but
that would have been well within the budget.
Except only $4.99 to shoot there. So there's more jousting that goes on. Sergio wins the jousting match. Is about to kill Sir Ranulph's son, but thanks to the Doctor's counsel, the king intervenes and essentially saves his life. And there's this sort of tired old trope of like the person, and maybe it's sort of accurate or not, but I mean, the person who was going to be killed is really angry that they weren't allowed to be killed, which I guess was a thing. But I feel like I've seen that so many times, and maybe it wasn't so much back in 1983. But I just was like,
come, sir, dispatch me. Yes, it's it is a bit over-egging the pudding, I think, even for the time. Not so far as I know a thing in jousts that people were ritually killed at the end of them. It was much more genteel than that. People did sometimes die. Even kings have died in jousting, sometimes disastrously. But yeah, it wasn't that serious. Anyway, they go back to the castle. Back to the only other set we've seen so far, and the corridors begin.
Yeah. So they're back in court, and everything's there, but the dogs. And there is even like the little person who is the court jester, I guess, is a little, has a more prominent role of sort of running around. But there's a bit of back and forth between the rooms, and the doctor like kind of immediately comes to the conclusion. I believe he even uses the word imposter in this episode, just like he sort of thinks like the king's not himself, and he also sort of realizes the king's supposed to be in London right now.
Yes, because he has March the 4th, 1215 memorized.
Exactly.
Don't we all?
Well, that brings up kind of an interesting, and I think it's interesting to compare the King's Demons in sort of the wake of Doctor Who and sort of the bigger picture of it. Like, the Doctor does this often and did this often with historical and pseudo-historical episodes that he knows the history, and he knows it to a T. Like, this happens then, this person should be here then, and that doesn't really happen that much in the present day. Or the future, even though it kind of should, right? Like this sort of it sort of, if you think about it, it's like, well, why doesn't he know everything that's going to happen in like 1986 or 2005 or 7 or whenever the thing is set, and also treat it as immutable history, that it's like it can't be changed.
It is accurate. I should say that on March 4th, 1215, as the show says, King John of England took an oath to the Pope, which was part of their making up and making nice after their falling out, as a crusader. The Pope was Innocent III, and John was, fully intending to go to the Holy Land, which is, why he pulls out his Holy Land propaganda later in the episode.
Yes. So at one point they're back in court. Yeah, we might as well talk about it. I mean, the tune that he pulls out there, he asks for a lute. And the actor. Let's talk about the actor for a second. So King John is played by Gerald Flood, who sadly died a few years later. I think in 1989 or so. But he's obviously also the voice of Kamelion in this episode and in Planet of Fire. I actually made a mistake in our last podcast. For some reason, I thought it was John Leeson. I was like sort of one of those things where I was assuming the voice of all the robotic companions was the same guy, but no, it's Gerald Flood, and I think he's quite good, honestly. Like, I think he clearly goes for the somewhat almost chewing the scenery jerkiness.
Yes,
and that it really
he
works.
is. This is the role that he is known for. Sadly, or positively, I don't know how you would say it, but yeah, he's just a marvelously plummy actor, very experienced, a big theatre actor, and has that booming theatre voice and gets very plummy, and once we get to the,
he gives it his all in the song.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We get the feast. The king calls for a lute. You think people are going to play for him. No, he picks up the lute himself, and it's Sea Shanty TikTok 1215 edition. Exactly. And he sings this song that just sounds so... I think they should have released it as a single. I think they should have released it as a thrash metal, death metal song. Because I'll just do the first couple of lines, which is we sing in praise of... Really. Oh no! There's I got the lyrics in front of me. There are 2 whole verses to this thing. We sing in praise of total war, and the way he sings "war" is just fantastic.
Yeah,
against the Saracen we abhor. So already you can see the layers of TikTok being grafted onto this thing. To free the tomb of Christ our Lord, will put the known world to the sword. And then the second verse, there is no glory greater than to serve with gold the Son of Man. Okay. Weird, bit of a weird propaganda line, but also kind of on point for King John, who was very avaricious when it came to money. He loved money and jewels and rich things. So, one of the more, again, this characterization of King John, it's not showing us that there's anything amiss with this king. It's, in theory we're supposed to think of the nice king is in London, taking the oath to be a crusader and being noble and honourable and patching up his differences with the Pope, blah, 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 which I think is what we're meant to take from the Doctor's statement. Like, this can't possibly be the king. He's supposed to be in London. Take the oath now. but this is spot on accurate King John behavior, and it's just basically the Master is messed up here by taking his version of John to the wrong date. Like if he'd chosen any date other than March the 4th, he would have gotten away with it.
Yeah, it's true. You come to think of it, it's like
the Doctor wouldn't have noticed.
Yeah,
he wouldn't have suspected a thing.
He's just there, and he's just this guy being a jerk. But what's actually well documented where he was. Yeah, that's interesting because it's like wrecking the Magna Carta per se. It's a little unclear how this is doing that if the real king's still signing it, right? He's just being a jerk to people outside of that. So, even within the context of the episode, it's kind of unclear how this is going to work for him.
I'm going to make him more of a jerk so that the Barons don't rebel, or they rebel earlier, or it's super complex plot. It's hard to figure out how it's going to work. Not one of the Master's best plans, you have to say. If you were to rank all of the Master's plans in the history of Doctor Who, this might come in bottom.
Yes, I think you'd have to sort of look at survival as sort of a weird exception, but because his plan is not anyway.
What is his plan in survival?
Survival. He's kind of trying to survive. Kind of in the title. No, I think this is extremely it's low stakes, and he's not even doing it right. So it's sort of the summary. So anyway, there's a lot but there's a back and forth with prisoners and what Sir Gilles doing. Turlo somehow ends up in the dungeon at one point. Honestly, a lot of it's it's hard to sort of know why a lot of this stuff's happening, but at some point the Doctor challenges Sir Gilles to a duel, essentially. There's a back and forth over whether someone who is I think the cousin of the king should be killed, and should he be boiled in oil, and I don't know. There's a lot of back and forth over that. But the Doctor sort of tries to manipulate things so that he can actually fight Sir Gilles, because he's already suspected something's wrong with the king. He sees this as a way to do that, and they have this extremely, again, 1983 BBC sword fight.
Which is supposed to be harkening back to the Pertwee Delgado sword fights, right? That's what this is kind of referencing.
Right. There was a couple of those. Now that I think about it, back in the day, had more to do with the fencing, and actually much more satisfied. For some reason, this was just even again of the time. This is such theater sword fighting, which of course that's what you're going to do. I mean, you don't have the same kind of anywhere near the same kind of stunt choreography, and just the effects and even the audio. Completely different era, but again, as I did with Planet of Fire and that final tiny master reveal, but still, it's really you couldn't have done one more take where it's a little more convincing.
Yeah, I will say the duel. I was fairly impressed by Peter Davison's fencing skills. Apparently, he was actually a fencer at one point. So
yeah, they were real moves. It's just they're very
I was also impressed that it was done in the studio.
It was actually done in the studio, and there weren't.
It was actually done in the studio, whereas I think that this would normally be done on film.
True.
They do it sort of more in the open air.
Yeah, and I think that's where Pertwee's episode might have benefited from more of that. And there weren't, I believe, and I'd have to go back and check that there didn't do the thing where you have the tight shot, wide shot, where the wide shot you clearly have stunt doubles shot in a way so that you don't really see their faces. It's really like Ainley and Davison just going at it.
And Ainley turns out to be as theatrical a fencer as he is a player. It was very on brand, I thought, his style of fencing in this duel. But yeah, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting the Fifth Doctor to take off his coat and get all action Doctor.
Yeah, I mean, he's done it. I think he's done that a few times, and it didn't surprise me as much. I remember in Earthshock, there's definitely been others where they took advantage of, like, Peter Davison's relatively young age, I guess, and have him sort of really get down and dirty, get his hands dirty, and with the bad guys here and there. Not to the extent that, say, Matt Smith did, but
the Fourth Doctor also fenced once. So the Third Doctor, Fourth Doctor, and Fifth Doctor all had basically fencing matches or sword fights at some point in their tenure, and then it just stops after that. Like, you don't get any more Doctor duels until David Tennant in the Christmas Invasion.
Oh yes,
so this is the last time the Doctor will do something like this.
Yeah, and I guess the implication is that some historical figure has taught him this. Like, he is highly skilled at this, in the sense that, like, if anyone in the audience is still thinking this is not the Master, that it is a true I mean, maybe the Master has also been trained, but it's one of those things where the Doctor is super skilled at a thing because, of course, he's almost, at this point near infinite age and is, has all the skills you could possibly have for being, like, several centuries old Time Lord.
Yes,
which is kind of cool.
He's not using a spoon.
Yeah.
In this case.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, let's not go there this episode. Yeah, we'll get there,
but yeah, the sword fight, I'm just sort of watching it again now out of the corner of my eye, and fairly impressive. But the point I was going to make was that Davison gets pretty handsy with his sword from this point onwards. Like, he's not shy in the second episode about pointing it around and threatening people with it, which is a bit undoctorly.
Yeah,
so he kind of goes a little overboard on the Action Doctor thing.
Yeah, and he definitely is, like, he's gotten very pragmatic about sort of when to manipulate the natives, which you almost see it almost as a progression in the Davison era, because early on there was sort of Black Orchid and other episodes where he's trying to be a little more open. Earthshock as well. Hey, I'm the Doctor, and suddenly he's blamed and imprisoned or what have you. And then, you almost feel like he's hardened by those experiences at this, from in his later couple of years where he's like, all right, you native people, I'm just gonna just say, pull out weapons and threaten, even though I'm obviously not gonna act on that. He does this something similar in Frontios. There's sort of the classic bit where they pull out the hat rack and sort of threaten people like it's a ray gun.
It's so colonial. I can't stand it.
Yeah.
It's so old school British.
But we're all sort of leading up to the big reveal of the final little bit here, where the Doctor has Sir Gilles at his mercy, and Sir Gilles pulls out a tissue compression eliminator.
Dun, dun, dun.
With the sudden realization that, oh wow, that's Tony Ainley, if you didn't know, and
for no reason at all.
Yeah.
In front of everyone, the Master reveals himself.
Right, and not just reveals himself with wavy 80s era special effects on his face, which for whatever reason was a thing. And even at the time, I remember thinking, what is that? Why is he doing that? Why isn't he just, like, either pull off a mask or a fake beard or whatever? Because it is Tony Ainley here, right? Like, I mean,
yes.
And they had in the Pertwee era, when Roger Delgado had some kind of disguise, whether it was glasses or whatever, he would actually, like, it was a physical disguise. It was something that, there was no sci-fi aspect to it. Yet for some reason, virtually every time the Master reveals himself in the Davison era, like, it's this weird, I guess, implied holographic technology or something that was obscuring his face. And
yeah, the Master went virtual. It's not the same. He's gone digital. He's sold out. He's not really in the disguise business anymore.
Yeah, and I feel like it even putting aside the date that the effects are dated, it just kind of takes you out of the moment and out of the show a bit. It's like, oh, come on, did that? And it's honestly, I hold a lot of shows to this standard. Like, you see special effects and you're like, did that need to be an effect? Couldn't you have just, wouldn't it feel more real and I'd be more connected to it if you didn't do this special effect? I'm really not a fan of how they, like, used sort of weird special effect of the era to reveal the Master's face in all these episodes.
Yeah, more practical effects for the Master.
Anyway, he's
enough
there,
of the CGI.
And, cue credits. And we open up episode 2. And we're at the, obviously where we left off. And there's a bit of a weird moment where the Master kind of gives the Doctor the option to sort of, do you want this knife or the tissue compression eliminator? The Doctor
and it's useless in your hands, which is absolutely correct.
It's accurate.
The Doctor can't use it.
Fact check true.
He's too much of a good man, despite the fact that he's been basically willing to kill the Master in this sword fight. He was playing for real stakes there. He takes the tissue compression eliminator, and the rest of the court is sort of like there's no real mention of the fact that the rest of the court has just witnessed Sir Giles transform into a guy with different coloured hair.
Right.
Who, for all they know, is still Sir Giles.
Yeah, and they just kind of have like one of those. I think this is like the most repeated line between the Doctor and the Master at beginnings of episodes in this era, which is like, so you've escaped from insert the place you were at the end of last episode.
Yes, last planet seen on.
Yeah, so he says you escaped from Xeriphas, which we actually never saw Xeriphas. It was just mentioned in the script of Time Flight.
I was going to ask you about that. That was never in the show?
No, what happened in Time Flight was there was a race of people, the Xeraphin, I guess, because they're from Xeriphas, and they were on Earth in prehistoric era, and there was blah, blah, blah. Master has to... This is one of the most incomprehensible Master disguises. But he ends up, at the end of the episode, getting transported to Xeriphas, which we never see, because he was trying to manipulate the race of Xeraphin something, have to dimensionally save them, move them, something, Master trapped. That was the sort of end of Time Flight. And so he says that, and again, to your point, like everyone's just kind of standing around watching. Like they're just chatting, no one really understands, I'm sure, what the Master's weapon is, so you're kind of like, I don't know, maybe they're just waiting to take their cue from the King, who of course we reveal later is not the King. But it's this weird kind of moment. But the King does step in.
And he does seem to go completely mad and basically order the Master to be thrown in the Iron Maiden.
Right.
Which, surprise, surprise, turns out to be the Master's TARDIS.
Indeed. And once that happens, I mean, it's all very, like, kind of fun. I actually didn't mind that. You kind of, like, suddenly it just disappears. So... I guess it's like it was just a big psych moment for him, right? he's having a sword fight because he's having a good time. Like, this is really the Master just like kicking back and having some fun. Like, he's
execute the plan where I pretend to be tortured in an Iron Maiden that's actually my TARDIS, even though it's sort of the Iron Maiden is open for most of the scene. And you can see him getting tortured in it, and you'd think maybe you'd catch a glimpse of TARDIS behind him, but no.
Yeah, I feel like the Master in this episode, honestly, is like my kid when he wants to, like, show me some haunted house he's turned our living room into, and I kind of have to walk through it, and there's these things that jump, and it's all fun, and it's like, but I'm just going to do all this stuff for the sake of it, and because it's fun. And I think if you sort of see this episode through that light, like, maybe it kind of makes sense. Like, this is just the Master, screwing around with the Doctor just for kicks. And
it's actually one of the greatest moments of levity in this pretty sort of dour serial overall. But we do then immediately get to see inside the Master's kick-ass black TARDIS, which was one of my favorite things about Planet of Fire. So
yeah,
it's nice
always
to see
fun.
it again.
Always fun to see the black roundels.
Love the black round things.
Yeah, the black round things. Nothing like them. So it disappears. The Master ends up in the dungeon. He's freeing Turlo. Except it's funny. The Master. They're actually not too bad with continuity here because the Master arrives in the dungeon and he frees the lady of the castle and their son and leaves Turlo. But you realize as this scene's happening, Turlough's never met the Master. Like, he has no idea who this guy is. He just suddenly realizes this guy looks kind of bad, and he's saying bad things about the Doctor. So at the end of the scene, he's like, this guy must be... He tries to sort of appeal to the other two, like, oh, don't listen to him. He's the evil one. Like, he's trying to talk in the medieval language, I guess. And but it's not bad in that they kind of remembered, oh, yeah, Turlough doesn't know who he is. Apparently there's
we've never met before.
It makes... You kind of think, though, shouldn't there be, like... You feel like there should be TARDIS crew training, right? Like, you get like
if you see this guy,
yeah, like you get at least the basics, right? Daleks, Cyberman, Master. Here's what they look like. You know, call me immediately if you see them. Bad stuff.
There should be a wanted poster in the TARDIS of just this guy. Have you seen this man? The picture of the Master at his most evil. Like, not that you wouldn't immediately divine that a guy wearing all black and a gold ruffle and an evil-looking goatee would be evil. But yeah, it helps to know your enemy. So
yeah.
Bad move on the Doctor's part for not educating Turlough more here. But we should also mention what happens in between is the Doctor is somehow bafflingly selected as the King's champion.
Right.
And then in the next scene, knighted.
He's knighted as
a
costume change.
Sir Doctor. He's not even Sir Doctor of anything. I really wish that they'd thrown in a Sir Doctor of Gallifrey here, or something like that. But He's just Sir Doctor, and it knighted with his own sword, which is kind of weird. Gives his sword to the King, even though he suspects that maybe he's gonna slice his head off at this point, and he has ample opportunity to. And
you kind of wonder why he didn't.
in our sort of post Game of Thrones environment, I think we sort of would expect this to be the natural outcome of the scene. There's actually a Doctor regeneration scene with his head being sliced off. That would be sort of a gruesome version of what happened with Tennant.
So it's Sir Doctor. He has a bit of costume change. I think this is the only time in all of Doctor Who he's actually knighted, and you kind of have to wonder. I
was going to ask you about that, because what happens with Queen Victoria in Tooth and Claw?
Oh, that's true.
Does she knight him then?
I can't remember. I believe...
Certainly
maybe.
Queen Elizabeth knights him, I'm pretty sure.
Prior
to marrying him?
In Day of the Doctor?
Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, that could be.
Which turns out to be a sore point. So... but this is, of course, not an actual knighting. It's a fake knighting because it's a fake king. So I guess it doesn't really count. But I like the idea that he's been knighted by monarchs so many times. We really should start calling him Sir Doctor.
We should. Actually, I'm just looking it up now. At the end of Tooth and Claw, and I think I remember this, he is knighted. He and Rose are knighted before she banishes them, which was interesting. He's been knighted on more than one occasion. And this time it's not by the true king, so I guess it doesn't count. But he has to wait until...
But he is Sir Doctor, or actually more properly, since he's not British, you have to refer to him as KBE. You don't say Sir.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, since he's an alien, you would have to call him, Dr. KBE. The Dr. KB.
We have to at some point compile all the Doctor's titles from various things on Earth, because he was President of Earth for a little bit there in the new series. Lord President of Gallifrey, certainly.
Well, there was that whole period where he gave that speech about "I am the oncoming storm," right?
Oncoming storm.
Featured. It was featured again in Day of the Doctor.
Dude, we got to create a LinkedIn profile for the Doctor.
I love it, but I would love to hear that whole speech. I am the oncoming storm. I am the whatever.
Something with
and
a
just
shadow
at the end, KBE, Knight of the British Empire.
Exactly. So he's knighted, and he now uses his newfound power to do his best to sort of start thwarting the Master's plan. So he actually arrests the cousin who had actually just come from London and knows that the king is actually there. But he uses that as sort of a ploy to free Turlough and Tegan, and just make sure everyone on his side is free. But the Master is working against him, and essentially is convincing the Baron and his family that the Doctor is bad and he needs to be killed. It's always interesting. Like, I mean, this is again, another sort of thing that we saw in Planet of Fire, kind of a trope of a lot of Master episodes. Like, he's always trying to convince people he's the good guy, and the Doctor's really bad.
Very simplistic by modern standards. Very, black hats, white hats kind of story. Which even in the 80s, they were kind of beyond that now. So this is very much a throwback.
Well, it's funny, like, how he's doing that now as the Master, now that his identity's been revealed, and everyone seems to sort of forget this guy was Sir Gilles, and no one asked him, like, what were you doing, bro? Like, who are you, and and do you even speak French? And like, what's with your accent now? Like, I mean, and what was with it before, really? So, and I feel like in episode 2, Tony Ainley is still speaking like 40% in a French accent. Like, he's talking really weird, and he's honestly, the Master seems a little bit high here and there, where he's like, his eyes
the Master was going really method. He was really method. He was into his French accent, so it kind of stuck with him. Reveal. But yes, he's described as Lord Master here. He's just automatically given a Lord title.
Why not?
And,
everyone's
just
getting
kind of
titles.
Treated as normal.
So there's
so
a lot of like, I'm good, no, I'm good, I'm in charge, no, I'm in charge, and there's like kind of back and forth, two timing almost, like I'm on this side, I'm not on that side, all over the place. The Doctor tries to get the cousin, I forget his name, to go back to London. He actually gets shot with a crossbow and ends up dying later.
And there's one scene when they're still in the dungeon where the Doctor outlines the whole plot again, in case we've missed it, that the Master is trying to bring King John into ill repute and end the signing of Magna Carta, or make it not happen in the first place. And then he says, it's like a small time job even by his standards.
Yeah, a bit of self-awareness there.
The Doctor has realized how low the stakes are.
Yeah, you almost feel like this was a thing added at the script when the plot was pitched, and they realized they didn't have time to go back to page 1 and redo it, and they're like, okay, you got to throw in something there. Like, this is pretty... When a few appearances before, he was threatening to destroy all of time and space. This is pretty low stakes. So it's
kind of a vacation. It's a busman's holiday for the Master. He's
exactly.
He's just
and
like
again, I think you see it in that light, that he's kind of kicking his feet up and goofing around and trying to like just screw with the Doctor on a Saturday afternoon.
He's just a troll.
Yeah,
he's a troll in this episode.
Exactly.
He's a time troll.
So,
there is a myth, by the way, that this role was originally designed for the meddling monk, which is not true, but would have been great. It's not true, and the original actor who played the monk was not even alive, so it couldn't have happened. But yeah, I would love to have seen more monk action at this point, rather than more Master action.
You could always bring him back, and just sort of talk about what he's up to. But I don't know if that we could talk a lot about the monk and what that even is about. This is definitely much more monk level plotting.
It is the low level stakes, but we get to the big shock of the episode. I would say ranking as number 1, which is that Tegan can pilot the TARDIS.
Right. There's a throwaway piece of dialogue. This actually works because there's two things about it. One, there's a throwaway piece of dialogue that is like the coordinates are already set, so that gives you a little bit of an out. The other two outs are sort of in the history of the show. So Tegan sort of accidentally piloted the TARDIS all the way back in 4 to Doomsday. So you might, and she, even within that episode, she pulled out like the manual. There was a point where she there's this big thick book that's like the TARDIS manual, like an actual book, which of course it would be.
Of course it was. Of course, still in paper form. Like the Doctor's 500-year diary.
She tries to use that and actually ends up doing some stuff and piloting the, dematerializing the TARDIS and having it reappear sort of somewhere close by, which unfortunately was outside a spaceship. But there's that. And then there is a bit, actually it might happen more than once, when it's just Tegan and Nyssa in the TARDIS. The Doctor is actually shown teaching them how to do things. on the console. So it kind of works, right? Like in a sense that, and I'm surprised they don't do more of this in the new era. I mean, the TARDIS is sort of treated less as a machine in those eras, but that the more you're on the TARDIS, sort of the more you're sort of taking things in stride and the more capable you become with all of this stuff. So,
right.
I took that to mean with my headcanon that she doesn't really know how to pilot the TARDIS, but she at least knows some basic stuff. And if the coordinates are preset, she can flip the right switches.
It's also interesting considering that we were in Planet of Fire the other week, and in which Turlo pilots the TARDIS.
Right, exactly.
So it's
we're hearing
future echoes here.
The Davison was really good at training his companions, clearly.
Yes.
So that happens, and when the Doctor basically there's the betrayal that the Doctor's rearrested, and he ends up actually changing back into his frock coat with celery completely intact, and tries to sort of hunt down like where King John is, what's going on, and he walks right in where King John is seemingly playing his fun little tune on the lute again, but it's not King John. This time it is full-on Kamelion. It is the robot, the prop. Actually, the first time I think we actually see the prop in the entire series.
The robot, the prop, the legend. And he sees him, and he he sees him playing the lute as the robot, and says, "I think Your Majesty is in need of a doctor," which I think would have been such a great if they'd had that be the cliffhanger. I think that would have worked much better. Because you genuinely would be, what the hell is going on if you saw that.
Exactly.
They shove it in here at the end of the second episode, almost as if they're kind of embarrassed of the Kamelion model, which, of course, they were.
Yeah, let's talk about the Kamelion model for a minute. So, I gotta say, for the time, it's not terrible. Like, it's kind of like, if you've ever seen iRobot, the movie, I got to say, when I saw iRobot, it reminded me a lot of Kamelion because it was sort of this very smooth, kind of. There's almost like an implied futurism because of its lithe build. The sort of transparent parts of it. You can kind of see like a little bit of pre-Apple design going on there. You got kind of like
showing the inner workings.
Yeah, you got to show the inner workings. You got sort of the glowing center in the abdomen, and I think it's only glowing in one color, but it's sort of if you think about today's LEDs,
glowing green abdomen.
You can sort of see some stuff there. I think it's like you could say like okay, you can see why some people were like this is kind of cool. We could do.
Well, he has an articulated neck that seems to be the main movement.
Well, and if you think about 80s robots of the era, which, you look at ridiculous... I mean, it's all parodied now, right? Like, where whether it's, I don't know, Rocky 3 or even, those just really, really silly-looking short-circuit, number 5 type robots that were all the rage.
I think that...
this is not
the best thing you could say about Kamelion is that he doesn't even get into the uncanny valley. Right. He doesn't even live there. He's so far over the other side that we're not kind of... He doesn't feel spooky or spookily close to real, which actually kind of works in his advantage. He is a bit more sort of almost Star Warsian sci-fi, where it's like so obviously something else. But so let's talk about the Chameleon Curse, which I am not very familiar with, but you've done some research into this.
Is that it's kind of like something the guys of the Doctor Who Completely Useless Encyclopedia they sort of cite the numerous deaths. So the real curse of Chameleon is that the guy who designed the software that ran the mannequin died very shortly after the King's Demons, and so he was really the only guy. He was really the only guy who knew how it worked. So they really
died in a boating accident, which I really want to know the details of how that happened.
Yeah, like,
crazy. Sounds like a very Doctor Who kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, it's very random, but I mean the curse sort of extends from there because like it seems that everyone who is attached strongly to Kamelion or his episodes died in subsequent years. So like Terence Dudley, who wrote this episode, we should note, and Peter Grimwade have both passed away. And Gerald Flood, I think we already mentioned, was he died I think in 1989. Who of course he played King John, as well as he did the voice of Kamelion in both this and Planet of Fire, and the gentleman who plays Howard in Planet of Fire, who was, basically more Kamelion than Howard in that episode, also died. So
spooky.
There's a lot of, unfortunate Kamelion passing away. Now, I should note, Kamelion has only 2 on-screen episodes, of course, but they've done more with him in other adventures and the novels, and particularly Big Finish. So there's actually a whole sort of season of Kamelion on Big Finish. There's like 4 different adventures that feature Kamelion. And they did, even though Gerald Flood obviously is no longer with us, they got some, I don't know who it is actually, but they had an impressionist come in and play Kamelion. So they've done some stuff with Kamelion. I always thought, like as a kid, I was actually really intrigued by the idea of Kamelion, but it's such an on-paper concept. It sounds so great on paper and really probably lives better in comics, in books, in audios, because what certainly of the era, so much was needed. They didn't even take the prop to Lanzarote in Planet of Fire because it was just more trouble than it was worth. But the whole idea, like, oh, the Doctor has this cool companion, like who's an animatronic robot that can actually take on the appearance and voice and personality of anyone. Like, you kind of think, oh wow, that's cool and interesting, and let's see what you can do with that.
I read somewhere that he was sort of supposed to be Doctor Who's C-3PO, which is kind of interesting because we, not a few episodes back, talked about the Invisible Enemy and about how K9 was sort of supposed to be the R2-D2, even though that doesn't quite match up because the Invisible Enemy was filmed before Star Wars. But this is supposedly much more of a through line. Like, Star Wars had a humanoid robot kind of like this. Let's just do that, but silver. And I kind of wish that they I would have loved they'd done it with a human inside it.
Yeah, or something. That would have been a much better decision. And again, I don't think you would probably go very long with Kamelion, but I would love to see like a standard Kamelion episode where his ability is actually used to the Doctor's advantage, right? Like, and so like he comes to some adventure and they actually have Kamelion in maybe the same way or a similar way that, Constable Odo in Star Trek, uses his ability here and there to
Deep Space Nine,
get an edge, and like that would be really interesting, and actually write it in a way where it might be surprising and like, oh, this is cool. Who's Kamelion in this scene? We don't know. That might get a little in Deus Ex Machina.
And we sort of get a hint. We get a little bit of a hint of what that would have been like, right? With the Kamelion turning into Tegan.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what happens is they have a little mind war, almost along the lines. Certainly not nearly as dramatic as Doctor versus Morbius. The Doctor and the Master go at it. Who's gonna have control of Kamelion? Which is I found very weird. Like the way this is written is very weird because the Doctor initially tries to take control of Kamelion, and the Master kind of like, smirks at him. Ha, you're getting old. Which I took to mean, okay, maybe for whatever reason, maybe just because he's familiar, the Master has more control over it. And then suddenly, 30 seconds later, they're fighting over him again. Like, I mean, it's just clumsy. Like, I don't get why suddenly the Doctor 30 seconds later can do it when he couldn't, like, right before. It's weird.
Yeah, it's something he keeps mentioning. Kamelion has a mind of his own, and that's supposed to be the crux point of this plot. But you definitely don't get that feeling.
Yeah. But they signify that the Doctor wins this match because it turns into Kamelion at the end. And even though it was a really bad placement of Janet Fielding. Like I guess they didn't have dailies or couldn't go back and do things, but she's so clearly like 6 feet in front of where Gerald Flood was sitting when they cut to her. It's like, oh, that was weird.
It's so very confusing. And also, what does it mean that the Kamelion turns into Tegan? Tegan was uppermost on the Doctor's mind.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they had
raises uncomfortable questions.
Kind of signified, like, why didn't it turn into the Doctor, right? Which it does a little bit earlier. Anyway, very strange. And
yeah, the rules are not clearly laid out, but
you can make up enough.
Bottom line is the Doctor does get the Chameleon usher into the TARDIS in kind of a, low stakes ending for even for this episode, for this story. It gets even lower stakes the way they're just sort of like, see ya.
I was totally struck by that. One, usually it ends with the Master getting kicked somewhere and the Doctor saying goodbye to all the good people who he met on this jaunt. No, he runs away. Like, he's never, like, redeemed in the eyes of the Baron. And he kind of just leaves the Master there. Like, the Master's just standing there in the room with everybody else. And it's like, oh, okay, now we're going to go off in the TARDIS. Like, we've escaped. Like, hold on a second. Like, wait a minute. Wasn't the whole problem?
The Master yells medieval misfits, which I think is a wonderful line.
Well, and there's this funny bit, actually, I liked. It's actually really hilarious, where Turlough has the sword, keeping everyone at bay from the TARDIS as they're rushing in. And he just really, for whatever reason, gets in the moment, and he says, "Whoever you are, don't try me too far." It's just the way he rhymes it, like he's like inspired by the song earlier, and the Doctor just come on, dude, get the hook.
That was a very good Turlough impression, Pete.
Yeah,
you nailed Turlough. I'm very impressed.
I mean, he and I, we go way back. So
back to the old school. Yes,
yeah, for sure. Mark Strickson and I, we used to hang out.
So they're back on the TARDIS, and all of a sudden Tegan's getting kicked off.
Yeah,
because the Doctor is giving Kamelion Tegan's room. It suddenly becomes a very high school like Mean Girls contest here.
Yeah,
all of a sudden.
And it's I gotta say, as the last episode of the season, this is really how you want to end a season of Doctor, really? Like, and they're kind of like, I'm gonna go because I don't even know why she's saying that, because she's just kind of like having a hissy fit over the robot being her in her form or whatever.
She says, well, the robot, she's suspicious of the robot, because why wouldn't you be? It was the Master's freaking property. And then she's like, well, Kamelion can have my bedroom then. And the Doctor's like, fine, I'm going to drop you off at home. And you're like, whoa, that escalated quickly.
Right. And then
so it's not actually, the way Tegan actually leaves when it's her decision. This is the Doctor saying, it's going to be my decision, you're off because you're not down with the TARDIS crew. And I decide what that is.
Yeah. It's kind of putting her in her place.
Really?
My assistant.
It's nasty Doctor, even though he does then agree to take them to the Eye of Orion.
Which he always, because he's so smart, always knew that's where they were going to end up anyway, and that's where he had preset the coordinates. La la la, zing.
Yeah, it's very bizarre, and I sort of had to watch the beginning of the next serial, which is The Five Doctors.
Of course.
Just to reassure myself that, oh yeah, they did actually end up at the Eye of Orion. He wasn't faking it this time.
Right. Somehow the TARDIS cooperated.
It's just sort of this awesome place, and they go there and they have a nice time, and they forget the Chameleon even exists.
Yes, indeed. Then that's the whole thing. The Chameleon is not even mentioned until Planet of Fire, and there's obviously practical reasons for that, but it's really weird, particularly if you're a longtime viewer. You're just like, I mean, did that episode even happen? And
yeah. What was the final bedroom arrangement in the TARDIS?
Exactly.
Because we do see Kamelion in a room, and it's kind of a bare room. And this is just after Tegan has left. So, was this...
Yeah.
Was this Kamelion finally getting Tegan's room? Like, after all that? And he's redecorated, and his redecoration is nothing whatsoever.
Yeah, well, that's... You would think, right?
Just going to have an empty room.
Yeah, I mean, or an empty room or an empty closet. I mean, does he even need a room? Like, why does he even need a room? Why doesn't he just hang out in the console room? But the Doctor is like, has this weird, again, another Davis era staple of just trusting whoever. Like, especially the Chameleon comes in, he's this robot that can be mind controlled. Oh yeah, no problem. Come on, you can come with us. And he sort of makes a thing about having a mind of his own. Not really great on the security decision making there.
Well, there is a thing that's sort of like accidental foreshadowing, accidental ironic foreshadowing, where Kamelion says, something about my story continues. Who knows where it will end?
Indeed.
And the Doctor says something like "with the Master," something meaningful like that, which is true. The Doctor does come back. The Master does come back in Planet of Fire, so it's sort of foreshadowing. But how Kamelion ends is the Doctor kills him.
He does. Yes, we talked about that.
It's like,
yes, we should talk about it some more.
Wow,
it is
the foreshadowing of this. It's bizarre.
Yeah,
and accidental.
It's eerie. I mean, there's a whole curse here, and I feel like Chameleon, perhaps of all the companions, gets the rawest of deals. For so many reasons, and we've gone over most of them, which is really too bad. Because again, I really wouldn't mind diving into those Big Finish audios, because I feel like there's some good potential to be had for this as a plot device, but also I would really like to explore the thing they mention a couple of times in this episode and in Planet of Fire. He does have a mind of his own. What does that mean? Who is this guy? And can we, in almost a retcon kind of way, better justify how the Doctor treats him in Planet of Fire, which I think is very, even looking at now, even for the time, it's really harsh and really, yeah. Did you really have to write it that way, where he's actually murdered by the Doctor?
Right.
It's pretty.
So I'm glad to hear that there is Big Finish audio that gives him further adventures. I kind of my headcanon was that in the many non-adventures that the Doctor has, all that time between episodes, between serials, where he's just sort of chilling. Just, being a tourist, playing a tourist around the universe, just on holiday.
Just playing with the yo-yo.
There's lots of moments, where he just sort of, he takes Kamelion to a tourist destination or shows him some nice sights, and that's it. There's no adventure. There's no bad things happen. They just have a nice time. And I kind of think of it as, the Kamelion is the classic Doctor Who version of Handles.
Oh, yes. Handles.
Time with the Doctor. Who, and the Doctor's just sort of showing him one last sunset. Because the kind of... Kamelion is a bit Handles-esque, because he's not all that.
Yeah, indeed. You almost want to see, Jodie Whittaker come back in time to pull a river song, right? Where they spend one last night together and give him a lot of time. Yeah, he's not treated well, and it's unfortunate. It's like, if you did this at all, it's really too bad. I know it was mostly circumstances, but if you're going to do this robot, mannequin companion with an interesting ability, it's a shame they couldn't do more with it.
Well, what's interesting in the vein of what might have been is this was not supposed to be the last serial of season 20. It was supposed to be a Davros and Daleks adventure next. That I don't know if it got along very far in writing. There was an electrician strike. This is the most 80s thing, that an electrician strike happened and kind of cut short the season 20 plans, which is kind of why it ends with a whimper, not a bang, with the King's Demons and not a big Dalek story.
Clearly got pushed to the next season. I mean, not the exact episode they had in mind, but they were like, we need to do that.
Exactly. So. I think it went through some changes before it became, what even is it?
Resurrection of the Daleks.
Resurrection of the Daleks.
Thus beginning the R word of the Daleks.
So
saga.
Resurrection of the Daleks, some version of it had ended season 20, and they would have been less likely, I think, to have ignored Kamelion in that circumstances, because the 5 Doctors, you kind of got to get them out of the way, because it's too confusing anyway.
Right.
Too many Doctors.
Already too many people.
Sarah Jane's in it.
Agreed.
So many people to take out the time stream, they couldn't even take the 4th Doctor. for obvious reasons. But he would have maybe Kamelion lost his chance to be instrumental in fighting against Davros and the Daleks. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, he was in the TARDIS when they encountered him later, so he might have come in handy.
That's true. Cut back to the Chameleon. Wait, Doctor, I could help. Someone. Hello.
They're actually. I wonder if someone's done that, written alternate versions of like the Awakening, Frontios, Resurrection of the Daleks, where Chameleon actually matters, and basically the story's over in 5 minutes because they have a shape-shifting robot that can essentially do whatever they want.
We either want that or we want sort of special editions that just throw in those scenes where cut back to TARDIS. Chameleon, hello? Hello?
Oh, anyone? Wow. Someone has to do that on YouTube.
Sounds like an exciting adventure. Love to come.
Too bad I'm plugged into this wall. Someone program an algorithm if you can when you come back.
If only I were more wireless.
So it ends. And
so it ends.
The credits. That was the King's Demons. So bottom line this for me here, Chris. What do you think, Dalek or Ogron?
I actually enjoyed this more than I think you did, because I have a soft spot for the historical serials, and for Doctor Who's mission to bring history to the masses. So if it made just one school child look up the history of Magna Carta and King John, I think it was worth it. So I'm going to give it 3/4 of a Dalek.
Oh my, interesting. 3/4 of a Dalek. I'm probably on.
Yeah, I gave Planet of Fire half a Dalek. So yeah,
I'm definitely on the
full
Ogron
side. For you.
It did not work for me. I think there's just so much wrong with. People's motivations. Certainly I've picked apart the sets and the effects, and again, like I really think I am forgiving of the era. I grew up on the show. I get it. Why you're making this on $5 an episode, but even taking that into account, I think this makes some very poor choices. But mostly, I kind of stopped caring somewhere in the middle of the first episode, somewhere toward the end, of like who is in the dungeon, who these people are in the castle, why this even matters, and there's Magna Carta stuff, and you're kind of learning sort of inaccurate stuff, but to me it just seemed like this weird mess that just nothing really feels right. And even though I tend to respect episodes that boldly try different things, I think this is not quite that. Like the ending where, like we said, they just sort of escape and run off, and it really just seems like the episode kind of stops. Like there's not really a proper ending even.
It's an absolute mess. It's a hot mess, and I think the standard with Doctor Who is when the plot makes no sense, can you enjoy the series of disconnected images? And I think I had a better time with that aspect of this than I did with Planet of Fire. Maybe because it's so sort of familiar. It's a BBC historical serial. They know how to do that instead of, say, inventing an entire religion, which Planet of Fire is forced to do with like 5 extras and a bit of styrofoam.
I got to say, when Kamelion shows up at the end, it gives you hope, because now we have sort of the big reveal. We also have this kind of cool looking in a certain way prop and character, and what you kind of want to see more than just the sort of mind war between the Doctor and Master. You kind of want to see that in the same way when you sort of see the Daleks on the Mary Celeste, or on in a place in history, like this modern sci-fi element connected, interacting with the world. Particularly the world of the past, and that never really quite happens. Again, it's at the very end, it's tacked on, and it just stops. And that could have redeemed the episode, but it doesn't happen. And and then again, you kind of have a bitter taste after knowing what happens to Chameleon later, because Chameleon as a character and an idea sort of seems to promise a lot, and then they never deliver even like half of that.
I think big part of my mark is the doing of the randomizer, because I think if we just come to King's Demons cold, I would have enjoyed it much less than I did in the full knowledge that we were watching effectively a 2-serial Doctor Who arc, which is what King's Demons and Planet of Fire are. They were even packaged together, I believe, as DVD or VHS at some point. Watching it in reverse, and so I applaud the randomizer, and that's a big part of my positive experience.
We Benjamin Buttoned it.
We did. And speaking of the randomizer, shall we pop back into the TARDIS?
We got to find out where we're going next. Do you have our randomizer technology queued up? Is it ready to go?
Yeah, so okay. I do, and I'll just explain how we've adjusted the randomizer.
Oh, yes.
Previously, we were doing it by season, and then choosing a random number within that season. What I've since done is I've increased the technology, and we now have a spreadsheet with everything that is a Doctor Who serial listed on it. So in the old series, that's the entire thing, like An Unearthly Child, the Daleks, Edge of Destruction, Marco Polo, etc., etc. In the new season, that's mostly single episodes. So
right.
An interesting nerdy point about this in constructing this spreadsheet is that I found out that we are almost at parity. If you look at it in terms of stories, and we've made certain decisions about what is a story, it doesn't necessarily always follow the show structure, but I think it follows what makes sense. So, for example, in the new series, Heaven Sent and Hell Bent, theoretically 2 parts of the same story, really so totally different you have to separate them, right?
Right, but then
anyway,
we
can get into that later.
You look at 3-parters like Utopia,
yes.
I forget what they were now.
The Sound of Drums. Last
of the Time Lord.
It does, yeah. Well, I'd love to parcel those out.
This is why this is a superior system, because in our previous system, you would probably unfairly weight those episodes because you get to the season and then, there's like 12 episodes in that season. It's inappropriate to just do one of those because those are really meant to be watched together. So you either count them together or you unfairly weight it because you have 3 chances of getting it. So now with put those as a single entry in our new mammoth spreadsheet.
So our TARDIS database randomizer lists 298 Doctor Who stories, and about 160 of those are 159 of those are old serial through the TV movie. And then Rose is number 160 through 298 Revolution of the Daleks. So we're almost level, and long before we finish this quest to watch every single the serial of Doctor Who, which I don't know if we're ever going to achieve that quest, but certainly the mission that we're on.
We might have to regenerate once or twice ourselves to really do it.
Our children shall take over this podcast, and then our children's children, and at some point we'll get to it. And hopefully Doctor Who would sort of... yes, more episodes will be added before we finish this, for sure. And we will get to that point of parity where there are an equal number of classic serials and new serials.
More importantly, we're going to get to 300. This is interesting. It's I know this is, people count the episodes differently and whatever. I know this is nothing official, but it's interesting that in terms of you're looking at stories, Doctor Who stories that have been told on television of the series Doctor Who, not counting spin-offs, etc., there have been 298 by our count. Now, important notes here, a couple important notes, because I know everyone's wondering, well, what about Trial of a Time Lord? Well, we mentioned it last time. We're treating that as 4 separate serials.
Exactly.
That's what they were.
That makes sense.
Even though it is, even on screen, they say part 14 or whatever. It's like, they're really standalone. And just linked with some trial scenes. And the Daleks master plan, we are bundling with Mission to the Unknown.
Right. This is basically the same thing. And we will deal with serials even if there are missing episodes.
We'll find a way.
We'll figure it out. So basically the randomizer is very advanced Google random number generator technology, which I have minimum episode 1, number 1, and maximum 298 plugged in. And I just hit the generate button, and that's our randomizer of where we will go next.
And
it could be anywhere. If it lands on something that we've reviewed before, and I've included much of season 12 in this, because we did talk about Spyfall, Fugitive of the Dradoon.
We did indeed.
Timeless Children and so on. So then we just generate another number.
Yeah. Spin again.
If we hit number 1, which spin again, and number 1 is also a spin again button because that's the first cell of the spreadsheet.
There's a law of time. You cannot be in the same place or visit the same place at the same time. I don't know what it is. There's a law of time. Yes. We can't revisit an episode here. The law
we can't. We can't run the risk of meeting ourselves.
Exactly.
And having different opinions. We can't. All right, so are we ready for this
ready
to find out where we're going?
All right.
Okay, I'm going to hit the generate button now. 255.
Oh my, that's pretty high.
So we're in the new serial.
We're at Dark Water.
Dark Water, Death in Heaven.
Wow. Very interesting. Okay.
We're going to another Master episode, another Master story.
Another Cyberman episode.
Yes.
So I feel like this is a thing for us. Because we had done Ascension of the Cybermen and the Timeless Children when they were broadcast.
Yes.
So it'll be interesting to go back to not this version of the Cybermen, but yeah, another big Master episode too. Wow.
And possibly the best Master reveal.
Oh yes.
I think ever done.
That's true. All right,
yeah, the arrival of Missy. So that's very exciting.
That's
where we'll go next.
So we will see you all there in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you, Chris, for chatting with me, of course, on
Thank you, Pete.
This fine Saturday, in this cold time in the northeastern United States. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If this is Pull to Open, if you have not yet subscribed, please do. This is a podcast, if you didn't know. Podcast available on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on Breaker, it's on Google, it's on all the services where you get podcasts. Please leave us a review if you can.
Yes.
That's always good.
Mash that subscribe button.
As the kids Tell your friends. There are share buttons, too. Use the share buttons. Oh, share buttons are underused. Use them.
Find us on TikTok.
Find us on TikTok for sure. We're at Pull to Open... just Pull to Open on TikTok. We actually had that one. There's Pull to Open 63 on Twitter and on Instagram, and we're sharing out more there, so please follow. We're having lots of fun with the guys on Instagram in particular. There's a lot of fun who-ness all over the internet, of course. And again, leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to drop us a line on any of those platforms. Slide into our DMs. We don't mind. And we'd love to hear from you no matter what you think of the show. Of course, we always like those 5-star reviews and thumbs up and kudos. But, tell us whatever you like. So go ahead, leave us a review, follow us on Twitter, and, just say hi if you ever see us on the internets.
And we will see you again in 2 weeks with Dark Water and Death in Heaven.
All right. Take care, everybody, and stay safe.